Coming up on this Friday edition of Daybreak, French police converge on a small town north of Paris as special forces search for the gunmen who attacked Charlie Hebdo magazine. Korea and Japan agree to boost economic cooperation despite their overall frosty relations, but Seoul's import ban on seafood from Japan will remain in place for the time being. Plus, the United States says there's no evidence that shows North Korea has the technological know-how to miniaturize nuclear warheads. This after Seoul said Pyongyang is close to mastering the technology. Daybreak begins now. Hello and thanks for joining us. To our viewers around the world, it's 6 a.m. on Friday, January 9th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to Daybreak. And we're going to get to the latest on the manhunt for the Paris terror suspects shortly, but we start with news that South Korea has completely ruled out co-hosting the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics with North Korea. There had been speculation that South Korea might make an offer to the North, as Seoul has been looking to open up high-level dialogue and improve its relations with Pyongyang. However, on Thursday, South Korea's Unification Minister Ryu Kil-jae flatly denied that any co-hosting offer would be made during talks. Last month, North Korea offered to host some of the Olympic events at its Masikryong ski resort. The proposal came after the International Olympic Committee announced plans that would allow host cities to share events with other countries to save costs. North Korea says the anti-Pyongyang leaflet campaign by civic groups is a growing issue that's hindering inter-Korean talks. In a notable turn, Seoul's Unification Minister, Ryu Kil-jae, has shown a more flexible stance on government action against flying the messages across the border. Our Connie Kim reports.
South Korea's unification minister says a considerable number of lower-level talks will need to take place before the leaders of South and North Korea can sit down for a summit. Speaking before the National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee on Thursday, Minister Ryu Kil-jae touched upon a number of inter-Korean-related topics. On top of the possibility of a meeting between President Park Geun-hye and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, Ryu said the lower-level talks would also likely include the possible resumption of reunions for families separated by the Korean War. On the flying of anti-Pyongyang leaflets by South Korean activists across the border into the north, an act that has angered the North Korean regime, Ryu showed eased positions towards the government's stance of having no legal grounds to ban the launches. He added that they would try to prevent the launches if they posed a safety threat to residents in the area. The National Assembly's Foreign Affairs and Unification Committee passed a resolution that urges the government to take action against South Korean civic groups that fly anti-North Korea leaflets across the border. A group of South Korean activists flew 600,000 leaflets across the border on Monday. Now that prompted the North to call on the South Korean government to clearly state its stance on the issue. The prospects of a possible inter-Korean summit were raised at the start of the year when Kim Jong-un said in his New Year's address that Pyongyang was open to talks with Seoul. President Park Geun-hye echoed that sentiment in her New Year's speech, but the leaflet launches have soured the mood. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, there are mixed signals out of Seoul and Washington about how advanced or not North Korea's nuclear missile technology is. The US Defense Department says there's no hard evidence that shows Pyongyang has the technological capacity to develop miniaturized nuclear weapons that are small enough to fit in ballistic missiles. Earlier this week, the South Korean Defense Ministry said in its white paper that North Korea is closing in on mastering this technology. This is a big issue because if Pyongyang was able to make miniaturized warheads, they could technically be attached to ballistic missiles, which could potentially hit the mainland United States. Now, despite their frosty relations, Korea and Japan have agreed that it's important to boost economic cooperation. The two neighbours held high-level talks right here in Seoul on Thursday. That included discussions on potentially lifting Korea's import ban on Japanese seafood. Our Hwang Sang-hee reports.
Following 4 hours of talks in Seoul on Thursday, senior officials from Korea and Japan agreed to continue their close economic cooperation. Korea's foreign ministry said the high-level dialogue was held to review and reaffirm the two neighbors' economic relations in their 50th year of normalizing diplomatic ties. A senior official said nearly an hour was spent discussing Korea's import ban on Japanese fisheries products, imposed after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011. Japan's chief delegate Yasumasa Nagamine claimed Seoul is implementing stricter regulations on Tokyo than other countries and added the import ban could have a negative impact on their economic relations. To that, Korea's chief delegate An Chong-gi said it's important to assure the Korean public that Japanese seafood is safe before lifting the ban. He added the issue can be reviewed after Korean experts conduct a field inspection in Japan next week. The meeting comes amid thorny bilateral relations stemming from Japan's ongoing denial of its wartime atrocities. The Korean official said holding such a frank, constructive, high-level discussion in the beginning of the year in itself is a positive sign for the two neighbors. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Time now for a look through the global headlines we're following this Friday morning in Seoul. For that, we turn to Eunice Kim at the News Centre. Good morning, Eunice.
And good morning to you, Mark. Police are flocking to a town in northern France where the two suspects in the horrific Paris terror attack reportedly robbed a gas station. Brother Sharif and Said Kouachi, described by authorities as armed and dangerous, are being hunted for shooting dead 12 people at the French satirist magazine Charlie Hebdo on Wednesday, including its editor, prominent cartoonists, and police. Officers have sealed off the village of Longport and are going house to house in search of the brothers. In a separate incident on Thursday, a policewoman was fatally gunned down in a southern suburb of Paris on Thursday by a suspect described as wearing a black and a bulletproof vest. Authorities say they found no link between this incident to the assault on the magazine. Meanwhile, France held a moment of silence at noon local time on its rare day of national mourning for the 12 victims of the attack, as well as for the free speech they had stood up for. The iconic Eiffel Tower was also dimmed for a time at 8 p.m. local time as a vigil continued at the Place de la République. The United States will close 15 military bases across Europe in a move that shows a shift of focus to Asia. Much of the closures will be of smaller bases described as remnants of the Cold War. The number of troops will remain relatively the same at more than 60,000, mostly in Germany, Italy, and the UK. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel confirmed the move as the Pentagon said it will save the U.S. military some $500 million a year. And recovery efforts will resume when daylight hits the Java Sea later today, and Indonesian search teams will try to begin lifting the tail of the downed Air Asia flight 8501.
The plane was split up, so the geosurvey's observation shows the position is flat on the seabed. It's no longer shaped like a plane.
The tail section had been located Wednesday on the seabed at a depth of about 30 meters and some 30 kilometers away from the plane's last known location. An attempt to salvage the section that could hold the plane's black box on Thursday had run into bad weather and poor conditions. Indonesia's Search and Rescue Agency coordinator Suryadi Supriyadi said today's operation will utilize a balloon. Head of the agency, Bambang Solistio, added that finding the missing bodies was still the main focus of the operation. Finally, Germany has agreed to a $600 million loan to help Ukraine pull out of its massive national debts and to rebuild the war-torn country in exchange for a commitment of economic reforms. Some of those reforms have already been enacted by Kiev's new parliament. The move comes ahead of talks in Berlin between German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk on Thursday.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Samsung Electronics says it expects its operating profit fell by almost 40% in the final quarter of 2014 compared to the same period the previous year. Although the figures make pretty grim reading, some analysts were expecting worse as the Korean firm's once booming mobile division is having rather a tough time of it of late. Our Ji Myung-gil reports.
In a guidance report released on Thursday, Samsung Electronics said its operating profit will likely be $4.7 billion in the October to December period of 2014, beating expectations. However, that would also mean that profits were down almost 37.5% from a year earlier, marking the first annual profit decline since 2011.
The main reason for the profit decline was due to shrinking smartphone profits as Samsung's Galaxy line struggles to compete with Apple's iPhone and cheaper Chinese rivals. Increased marketing costs also contributed to the decline in operating profits.
But the fourth quarter figure still marks a rebound from the company's third quarter profits of $3.6 billion, which was Samsung's lowest quarterly profit in more than 3 years. Fourth quarter sales likely fell more than 12% on year to some $47 billion, but that's up $4.5 billion from the previous quarter. Analysts presume Samsung's semiconductor division performed better than the cash cow mobile business in the October to December period, aided by a rise in demand for memory chips that go into personal computers and smartphones. Analysts say Samsung's mobile business will better this year.
Although the world's smartphone market is still competitive, we expect Samsung to regain its footing with the upcoming release of the Galaxy 6 smartphone. Samsung has also improved its lower-tier smartphone lineups to retain its market share and boost profits.
The analyst also predicted that sales of semiconductors and advanced display panels will pick up thanks to the favorable market conditions. Although Samsung did not provide a breakdown of its divisional profits, analysts expect a better picture of Samsung's overall performance once the final earning figures are released later this month. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, Samsung Electronics is one of the big boys at this year's International Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, which is always a lot of fun. Our Kim Ji-yeon shows us how some of the latest and hottest gadgets are getting smarter, more wearable, and even more super connected.
What should I wear? It's a question people constantly ask themselves after setting foot in the 2015 International Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Perhaps a drone for your wrist that unfolds and takes flight on your command to capture a Kodak moment. Or something that helps you make the most of your time in the gym, tracking your heartbeat and movements. And who needs a chauffeur when you can order your BMW to pick you up right away?
BMW, pick me up. It's not science fiction anymore. The age of the Internet of Things has already started.
Wearable smart devices are increasingly in the spotlight. Companies present gadgets in line with the Internet of Things, where devices are talking to each other across the Internet. Companies believe that everything we touch or interact with will be connected to the Internet in the next several years. Samsung Electronics set a goal of having all of its devices, including home appliances, connected to the web by 2020.
I'm coming home.
And the climate for business looks bright with the rising demand for smart home devices.
US-based Strategy Analytics forecasts the global market for smart homes to grow more than $100 billion by 2019. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
Right, well, back to the present day now, and with fears the latest outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease might spread even further, Korea has stepped up containment efforts. Over the past 4 years, the government has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to try and deal with contagious livestock diseases. Our Lee Ji-eun reports.
$2.7 billion US. That's how much the Korean government has spent over the last 4 years to deal with livestock diseases. According to the Agriculture Ministry on Thursday, the government spent more than $2.5 billion between 2010 and 2011. This is when the country had to slaughter over 3 million animals in the nation's largest outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease. On top of that, $75 million went toward dealing with avian influenza, where over 6 million chickens and ducks were culled. The money covered the costs of slaughtering the animals, sterilizing infected farms, and compensating farmers. And the latest outbreak of foot-and-mouth disease that started last month, over 28,000 pigs have been slaughtered so far, already incurring a loss of some $9 million. But the government is hoping to save some of the cost this time. Instead of slaughtering all animals at infected farms, the government's policy now is to selectively slaughter only the ones showing symptoms of infection. Along with strengthened quarantine measures, the government is considering penalizing farmers that don't vaccinate their livestock. Experts also say that the government should set aside a bigger budget for animal vaccination and quarantine to keep diseases from breaking out in the first place. Despite the efforts, though, the Agriculture Ministry confirmed another case of the disease in Sejong City on Thursday. The ministry said authorities have culled 226 pigs at the farm. Lee Ji-eun, Arirang News.
Right, well, it's January 9th. We're just wrapping up the first week of 2015, so we thought we'd take a look at what's in store for the nation's presidential office, the parliament, and the main political parties this year. For a rundown of the year's biggest political events and what kind of impact they're going to have on everyone here in Korea, our Park Ji-won reports.
The first major political event of the year will be on February 8th. That's when the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, will hold a convention to select a new party leader and Supreme Council members. Up until last July, the opposition party was led by two co-leaders, Kim Han-gil and former presidential candidate An Chol-soo. However, the party faltered in July's by-elections and has been led by interim leader Moon Hee-sang ever since. Former presidential candidate Moon Jae-in and Park Ji-won, a close aide to former President Kim Dae-jung, will go head-to-head for chairmanship of the party in February. On April 29th, by-elections will be held for the 3 parliamentary seats that turned vacant when the minor opposition Unified Progressive Party was disbanded in December. These are 3 electoral districts in which traditionally progressive parties have been successful in the past. If the ruling party loses all 3 this time around, though, it could be seen as a referendum on the incumbent administration. In May, both the ruling and opposition parties will elect their new floor leaders. For the ruling Saenuri Party, an internal strife between supporters of President Park and those who don't stand with her has widened. Whoever replaces current floor leader Lee Wan-gu, who's in the Park Geun-hye camp, will have a big influence on the relationship between the party and the presidential office. Later on in the summer, the minor progressive Justice Party will elect its new leader. Experts say the most watched of the party elections this year will be when the new floor leaders are picked in May.
The presidential office can push through its agenda at Parliament so long as the floor leaders cooperate. For the president, the floor leader is more important than the party leader because the floor leader leads legislative duties. If the ruling party's new floor leader comes from outside President Park's support base, it will be a tough year for the presidential office.
The government aims to forge ahead with reforms aimed at a more flexible labor market, at state agencies, and at the national pension system. These are issues that are controversial, so they require a cautious approach to minimize backlash. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And TGI Friday, everyone, as we kick things off with the 2015 Asian Cup, which kicks off later today. Now, for the Korean national football team, their first group stage match kicks off on Saturday against Oman in their first step towards trying to win their first Asian Cup title in 55 years. Now, ranking-wise, the 69th ranked Korean national team is ahead of the 93rd ranked Oman and also has a winning record of 3 wins and a loss. And with some of the key players in Oman injured, it seems to be a rather smooth sailing for the Taeguk Warriors. But Oman showed some offensive power, going undefeated during the Asian Cup qualifier, winning 4 matches and drawing twice while scoring 7 goals and allowing just 1. Of course, with Ki Sung-young leading the way as the captain and Lee Chung-young as the vice captain, the national team looks to get a jump start on their quest for the Asian Cup title. Now, if Kim Yeon-ah is the figure queen, then 18-year-old Park So-yeon will soon be called the figure princess, especially with the kind of performance she showed during the 2015 National Figure Skating Championship in Seoul. Now, with many considering her the favorite to win the women's single gold during the National Figure Skating Championship, she didn't disappoint on her first day of competition, scoring a respectable 60.40 during the short program and taking a lead. With the free skating performance taking place later today, she hopes to win her first gold medal in the event, with her mentor Kim Yeon-ah set to hand out the medals as well. Now, the interest in Major League Baseball here in the nation has skyrocketed ever since Lee Hyun-jin arrived in LA 3 years ago and dominated the Major League hitters. And today he's leaving to LA once again in preparations for the 2015 season. Now, the hefty lefty who spent a busy off-season in Korea will leave to LA today as he begins his private training before spring training begins in February. The 28-year-old will arrive in Los Angeles and begin working out at the Boris Corporation Training Center, then join the Dodgers in Arizona for spring camp. Now, winning 13 and 14 games respectively in his first 2 seasons, Lee Hyun-jin looks to win at least 15 games in the 2015 season. Now, Lee Hyun-jin became the first pitcher in the KBO to head over to the majors, and now Nexen Heroes Kang Jung-ho hopes to become the first position player from the KBO to play in the majors. But is he close to a deal with the Pirates? Well, his agent Alan Nero certainly thinks so, expressing confidence that they will have an agreement with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Nero added that the process has been positive and that general manager Neil Huntington has been trying very hard to come to the table with a deal. Meanwhile, it's reported that Kang Jung-ho is seeking a 4-year deal worth around $15 million. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning, and good news for folks who are tired of freezing temperatures. The severe cold will ease up and temperatures will climb up to average this afternoon, bouncing back to positives. And even the current temperature is a couple of degrees higher than the same time yesterday, but it's still very cold, with readings sitting down at -6 degrees Celsius here in Seoul. And skies will not be as sunny as yesterday. A few patches of clouds will be followed by morning sunshine, and dry weather advisory has been upgraded to warning in some parts of the eastern coastal regions. So be careful with anything capable of starting a fire. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. Now, the low in Seoul is kicking off at -6 and the high will climb up to 2, while Daegu and Gwangju should peak at 7 and 6 respectively, and Busan will reach 8 this afternoon. And let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like Jeju Island will rise to 10, while Daejeon and Dokdo will be getting up to 5. Well, that's all for Korea, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's it for this Friday edition of Daybreak. Enjoy your weekend. Korea Today is coming up at the top of the hour. And do have a fabulous Friday. Goodbye.